Night school?
Night school.
Night school.
Here we are.
This is my pastor.
Hi guys. Welcome to night school. I should
Yep.
say I'm new to night school as
Yeah,
well.
welcome
so
to night school, Brent. But you've watched one.
and funny, I did take some night school when I was at CBC at the Richland campus, which is a lot bigger now than it was.
Yeah.
And I drove over, and it was, I think, math. It was really bad. I don't remember what it was.
Uh-huh.
So I did some night school. I've been a part of
Yeah.
that.
It's named after CBC night school, actually. We named it night school because I took a speech class in night school at CBC in Pasco, though. And it was the most laid back class in the world.
Oh, that was the coolest class.
Yeah.
In terms of people, because I think when I did CBC, I was doing Running Start, and so Running Start was full of, in the mornings when I would go to class, at the time that I went, it was a bunch of Running Start high school nerds like me, and then 40-year-old moms who wanted to come back to school.
Right.
And when I went to night school, it was like electrical workers. It was it was a bunch of blue collar guys just trying to get back, just finish up an education, finish up a degree they started 15 years, or 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever. And it was fun. It was super chill. The teachers were way chiller. The breaks were longer. I mean, everything about it was
They just
so
let
much
out
better.
class early. Like,
Yeah.
they didn't care.
No.
I was telling Raleigh in the first episode when we were talking about why we named it night school. I think you could just walk in with alcohol. Like, if you just walked in with like a glass of wine in your hand or a beer or something, I don't think anybody would have said anything.
Yeah, I was 17. They probably would have noticed that. But I don't know, maybe not now. Who
I was
knows?
in Running Start too, but I'm remembering it from 25-year-old vision, and so I'm assuming that it was like it would be now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are certain
I probably
classes
looked 15, so
that
I
I
probably
think
wouldn't have
work
flew.
for night school. Like, I think I took math, and that was fine. And I think I took, like, I don't know, Spanish or something like that. But I would think, like, I don't know, anything that was like history, I feel like there'd be just too much. I think I'd fall asleep. I think I'd be too tired.
Right.
Science, I'd be like, I don't know.
I agree.
This can work or not work, which that might be the case for this podcast today. You got a pastor on, might work, it might not work. Who knows?
Well, it's a pastor talking about drugs, though, so that balances out.
That is kind of interesting.
That's right in the middle, then.
Yeah, how ironic that you're the one that's doing all the like church books deep and wide, and I'm doing the drug one. That's fairly ironic.
That's nice.
In that
But
way.
night school is about like sharing information from different perspectives, and so given the format, it's actually perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I want to do episodes where we like bring on like a Buddhist and talk about his perspective on the gospel, and then bring on a Christian and talk about evidence for reincarnation and do stuff like that.
That'd be
Just
sweet.
like tie people into ideas they wouldn't normally be tied into and see what happens.
Yeah. Nice thing about a podcast is it's pretty free flowing to be able to do that kind of stuff.
Right.
The format's kind of flexible in that way. Which
Yeah,
is
we
nice.
don't have somebody we got to call like, hey, is this okay? Like.
Yeah, exactly. There is no bar of journalism, right? To
Right.
be sure it
Well,
happens.
so why did you read a book about morphine in the first place? Did it just jump out at you, or was there something you were investigating?
Yeah, the book is called Dreamland, and it's by a guy named Sam.
That's very glorifying.
Yeah, Sam Quinones or Quinones or something like. I don't know how you pronounce the exact last name. He's a journalist who writes for New York Times, Washington Post, and all those kind of things. And it's kind of a memoir of the opiate epidemic, and so yeah, it has to do with morphine, but like on a bigger scale. Just how did this opiate epidemic kind of come to fruition, and why is it such a big deal right now? And so that is a question, like, what in the world am I doing reading a book like this? And for me, I remember it was referred to by somebody else in another book that I read as, quote unquote, the best book on the opiate epidemic that he's ever read.
Oh, cool.
And I was like, I've heard of it. Like, I know it exists. I've had relatives who have lost jobs because of opiate epidemic, or opiate addiction.
Yeah.
I know that it's kind of it's a uniquely white American middle class, kind of middle America sort of problem, or at least it has been. It's kind of getting, a little bit more ubiquitous everywhere. But for a while there, it was like, and not like, that's the thing of it that the book kind of takes notice of, is it's this epidemic that's happening right underneath our noses, because it's not in back alleys and it's not weird drug deals. It's like getting delivered, kind of like you'd order a pizza. You can order some opiates or some black tar heroin, and how that kind of all comes together. So it was written by a guy who has got a history with specifically like Mexico-related issues. The author had spent some time down there, speaks fluent Spanish, and that has a piece of it. Because basically, the concept of the book is you've got black tar heroin coming up from the south in Mexico, and you've got pill mills being distributing opiates and as a way of making money on the East Coast to like professionals who are looking for kind of a drug, and then they all kind of like meet in the middle, like right in the Midwest is when it kind of like those two things converge. An opiate epidemic or an addiction related to pills sets up for a cheaper version and a higher rush to come through this black tar heroin. And so the reason, how did some of these supposedly middle class doctors, lawyers, librarians find themselves addicted to black tar heroin? Like that just feels like you're going from 0 to 60. And the reason is because they started with, they probably went and had a surgery. They got sent home with some pills. They asked for more than what they wanted or what they needed or probably initially prescribed just to try and save a doctor's visit and not pay a copay. They find themselves addicted to it. Then it becomes this whole thing. And then all of a sudden that gets expensive. And so they look for other ways to kind of deal with the rush. And then
It seems like either one could be cheaper based on your insurance plan, right? Like you could look at your insurance like, oh, I got really good insurance, I'll take the pills. And then you could look and be like, oh, my copay is too high, I'll go with the black tar heroin.
And honestly, that's where it gets to, where it's like you look at it and be like, who didn't think they could afford a copay? But then the amount of drugs that they need is beyond a limit of what they could get personally, and so now they have to go into the sub-economy of drug addictions, and these pills are basically selling for $1 per gram of morphine that's inside of these pills. And so you've got things like OxyContin, hydrocodone with like a 50 milligram pill of OxyContin or whatever is basically selling for $50 per pill. Like it's $1 per pill.
Wow.
And they're our bodies adjust and adjust so much to this that it kind of puts us in this position where we just kind of needed more. And I'm jumping into this a little bit too much. So the basic concept of it, why is it called Dreamland? I think that's a good place to start.
Sure.
And it features a small Midwest town called Portsmouth, Ohio. Portsmouth, something like that. I don't know how you pronounce that, but it's in kind of near Columbus, Ohio. And in that town, it's a small, typical American town, small downtown, 4th of July parades, all the kind of things you think about. There existed a community pool, and the pool was called Dreamland. And for a long time in the 40s, 50s, 60s, this was a place where the community happened. It's so hot out, the families would come down. You'd buy a pool subscription for the membership for the year for like $20, and your whole summer was filled with this. So many memories are made there, friendships are made there, relationships, people date there. They got married, and that was like the thing that connected them, all that kind of stuff. And so big community thing. And then as the drug culture began to take over and jobs began to leave, and the only way that the economy kind of stayed afloat was through these pill mills and addictions and a quick way to get stuff.
Is a pill mill a legal
let me define
company that manufactures
No,
opioids?
a pill mill is essentially a doctor who overprescribes a prescription because he knows I can just shuttle people in. I can bring them in. I can bang on their knee for 30 seconds with one of those little hammers, perform an evaluation, and get them out the door with a prescription for OxyContin or hydrocodone or whatever they need in 2 minutes or less.
Yeah.
So it's not really caring for this individual. And if they can just keep churning these things out, then they can buy bigger cars, bigger homes, and they don't have to do it for a couple of years, and they're all set to go. And so that's what's taking place. There's literally, for a lot of them, and they're in small towns, so like they're not going to be the big wealthy doctors that they maybe thought they were going to be, and they graduated with a ton of school debt. So what do? How do you make the ends meet with that way? So they decide we're going to open this pill. I don't think any of them started thinking that way. They probably just had a few people get injured on the job, slip, fall, hurt their back, genuinely need pills. And then it became hey, instead of like you come in every 2 weeks, how about you come in once a month and we'll give you double the prescription for it. But then they're still showing up after 2 weeks because they got addicted to these pills.
Right.
And
It'd be so easy to justify because it's not like you need to convince anybody to do something bad for them. They already come in wanting to, and all you got to do is sign a little piece of paper.
Yeah.
You're not the one giving it to them, and you're not the one asking for it. You're just signing a piece of paper that says they can have it. I see how you could justify it.
And pain management's an interesting thing because how do you measure pain? Right? If somebody has a burn on their skin, there's a way to measure if it's a first, second, or third degree burn. If there's a fracture of an ankle or a finger or something like that, you can have x-rays and be like, this is a compound fracture, this is a hairline fracture. Those are all like measurable. I can point to it. I have evidence for it. But when you go into the doctor, when I went into the doctor with my stomach issues and they go, how bad's the pain? Like, I would be like, I don't know. It's pretty bad.
Right.
Like point to a smiley face. Like this is
or they say 1 through 10, and it's like, well, then I'm comparing it to the least painful and most painful thing I've ever experienced, or I can imagine.
Yeah.
Or
so they say, well, breaking your femur, that's like the most painful thing you could ever. Supposedly, that's the most painful thing you could ever endure. So let's say that that's a 10, but I don't know what that feels like. Like when I had my gallbladder thing episode, and I had some gallstones going, as I mentioned in the talk like a couple Sundays ago, like. I woke up at midnight and I felt like an alien creature was trying to rip through my chest. It hurt. I've been in a massive car accident, was in the ICU for 6 days. This hurt way more than anything I ever went through. I broke my neck in 2 places, my hand, and crushed my leg and lungs and all this kind of stuff, right? And I was like, this hurts more. This is, if I thought that was a 10, this is like a 12. So I go in and I'm like, I don't know, a 9, but that's the hard part is you can't measure pain. There's no way a doctor can justify from a third-party perspective what level of pain they were other than they came in, they told me my back's out and it really, really freaking hurts and I need you to give me some pain meds.
And you know why you're answering the question when you rate it 1 through 10. So really the question is, how bad do you want drugs on a scale of 1 through 10?
Exactly.
Right? Because it's not like you think you're contributing to a survey to determine how much pain people have in this or that injury. They're just saying, like, how bad do you need drugs? 1 through 10.
And who can justify arguing with you? It's a subjective thing. So you can't, as a doctor, go, I mean, bullshit. You're not at it. Right? You're probably like a 4. And you're like, who are you to tell me what I'm at? Right? So as a result, then, you're right. Like they have a peace of mind about saying, okay, we're gonna give them these pills and make these things happen. And it is funny because you can see there's like a sense of watching this and going, all right, you're a doctor who leveraged your ability to write prescriptions legally and gave these people these addictions. Or this avenue to be able to basically go and do this for their life. You're like destroying their life, right? But on their side of things, they're thinking, I'm helping these people. To some degree. Probably at some point it crosses over to, no, I know that I'm just capitalizing on their misfortune and their addiction and making money in my pocket. But at some point, there is a line somewhere where they genuinely think that they're helping out, right? And that's a tricky thing because we could look at that doctor and be like, how dare you? How could you? What kind of a dark person are you that you would feed their addiction and put them in this kind of position? Yeah. But if they're thinking in this way that I'm actually helping them out, then that does something to us. Because I was watching a documentary with my wife the other night called The Inventor. It's on HBO, and it's about the woman who founded Theranos, which is like a blood work company, and she dropped out of Stanford to start this thing, and it was a big deal for a while. It was the highest grossing or highest net revenue or value, I should say, company owned by a woman in America. So she was on the Forbes list. She was making billions of dollars doing this thing, right? And the concept was, what if we could do blood work with a simple pain, like a drop of blood from your finger, as opposed to having a phlebotomist stick a IV in your veins and pull out 3 vials of blood, right? Because that's difficult. You have to have a trained professional do that. Nobody likes, a lot of people don't like needles, and so they're just like, that feels too hard, the bar's too high, I'm not going to get blood work done. And sometimes that blood work can actually identify problems that you might have and really save your life. Yeah. And would you be more likely to do it if you had a pinprick on your finger and it was a Walgreens and somebody who's making minimum wage could do it for you, right? Then yeah, you would do it more often. So that would, like, you're revolutionizing or potentially revolutionizing the medical industry if you could actually make that work. And so she's creating all this stuff, and the story, it's a long documentary, but I'll save you the time on that one too. This is a bonus night school.
Let's go.
But in that scenario, she was working on this product that wasn't, like, she had her R&D people coming up to her going, the law of thermodynamics tell us that this is not freaking possible. Like, we cannot do what you're asking us to do. And she, in her mind, had this expectation of, no, I'm the next Steve Jobs. I'm the next Elon Musk. I am the visionary. I cast the vision for it. R&D catches up to it, right? Because
R&D, is that research and development?
Yeah, research and development. So, so like, there are stories of Steve Jobs coming to his research R&D people and going, I want a phone that I can fit in my hand that does all of these things. And they're like, that's not possible. And he's like, it needs to be possible. Like, you're doing it. You're figuring this out, right?
Right.
And then lo and behold, you put the pressure on them. You change their perspective of what boundaries can be pushed. And then we get the iPhone, right?
Or Bezos, when he decided to go so deep into debt that they put Zappos out of business. Everybody on the board is like, you're out of your fucking mind.
You're out of your mind. What are you doing?
Like, just wait.
We're going to do this. And so in her mind, that's what she's doing, right?
Right.
So don't tell me it can't be done. I'm going to sell it as if it's going to be done. And then all of a sudden the Wall Street Journal writes this big expose on her, calls her a fraud, and she doubles down on it. And in this documentary, a behavioral psychologist named Dan O'Reilly comes on, and he says, it's easy for us to point our finger at her and be like, how could you lie to the American public and, like, raise all of this money as if your business is worth $2 billion, and it's not. You're not even doing close to what you said. And he said the reason that she can get her mindset around this is if we performed a social experiment and we brought our friend over here in and we rolled a dice, and I said, I'll give you $1 for every number that's on the dice, right? So 1 through 6, you're going to either make $1, $2, $3, all the way up to $6, right? But here's one factor in it. You're going to decide beforehand whether after you roll the dice, you want the top of the dice or the bottom of the dice, right? So 3 or the 4, those two numbers always equal 7. So 1 or 6, 2 or 5, 3 or 4, that kind of thing. And he's like, you'd be amazed at how lucky people are when they roll the 1, how lucky they were to choose the 6. Like, if you thought it would be 50-50, like if you brought in 100 people, 50 people would choose the top, 50 people would choose the bottom. When they roll the 1, they're like, oh, I chose the bottom. Like, I win. I get $6, right? So obviously, the irony of people trying to lie their way into $5 extra. Okay, does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then he said, all right, now we're going to hook them up to a lie detector test and see if and we're going to tell them the same thing.
Oh, so they don't have to say whether they chose the top or the bottom?
Until after the dice is rolled.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Actually,
sorry,
did
that
miss
was a
that
factor.
part. I did miss that part.
Okay, sorry.
You saw
that's a big
confusion in
factor.
my eyes, and that's
so
what it was.
I'm going to say, pick something beforehand, but don't tell me what it is. Then
Right.
roll the dice, then tell me what you chose. And they would roll the dice. It would come up a 1 occasionally, or 1 out of 6 times it would come up a 1. And you would say something like, oh, yeah, I chose the bottom. How lucky is that, right?
Right.
Crazy, right.
Okay.
All right, so now we're going to hook you up to a lie detector test and see how you do. And he said the numbers kind of adjust a little bit more back towards the median, which is basically 50-50, but still it's heavily biased towards you trying to fool me into making money. But this lie detector test can tell when, out of self-preservation, like our body temperature rises, our blood pressure starts to go a little bit faster, we're clearly lying or trying to hide something, right? He said, but one added factor to that. If instead of you getting the money for this, we decided to, up in advance, give it to a charity of your choice. So you're not getting the money and you rolled the dice, would you still lie and would it show up on the lie detector test? And what they said was the numbers they go back towards the original one where even though you're hooked up to a lie detector test, your blood doesn't rush, your heat temperature doesn't rise, and your body doesn't tell itself that it's lying or catching itself in a lie because you think I'm not personally benefiting from it. This is for the benefit of somebody else. Basically, it's okay for me to lie as long as it's not for my personal benefit.
And it's so justifiable to people psychologically to lie for the benefit of others that it doesn't even give them the physiological reaction of lying.
Correct.
Wow.
That's it. So
if I ever want to fool a lie detector test, I just need to manipulate myself ahead of time.
Convince yourself
into thinking that I'm lying because I need to.
Yeah, but then the question is, can you actually do that? Because isn't your mind kind of like, that's a blind test, but like I think your mind can kind of figure that out a little bit more.
Right.
All that to say,
but that's how she justified all that money. She's like, well, I'm going to save the world. Fuck them. I'm taking their money.
I'm trying to literally help people who are so afraid of getting blood drawn, but they need the benefits of a blood test. So like it's okay to lie about this. And yeah, she received a bunch of money as a result of it. So there's like controversy there. And actually, her trial's coming up in like January of 2021. And so it's going to be a little bit more public in that way. But
wow.
Okay.
And she did successfully delude herself into thinking that it was for other people, because it sounds like she wanted to.
Absolutely.
The fact that she was comparing herself already to other successful, innovative people sounds to me like she just wanted to be on the innovator Mount Rushmore. I don't think she was really thinking about
the right thing to do is when you get called out from the Wall Street Journal is to go, yeah, you know what? That's part of being a visionary. We cast big vision. Sometimes we hit it. Sometimes we don't.
Don't double down on what you said about the product. Double down on what it means to be a visionary.
Yeah.
And say,
when everybody,
yeah, you know what? I got big nuts. I'm taking big risks.
Exactly.
I really hope it pays off.
Who's gonna judge you for that?
That's less people.
Less people.
Less.
But like the true people, I think, who recognize greatness, like everybody knows that Steve Jobs was a jerk to work for and probably an asshole totally in general in life.
Right.
But would you have wanted to work for the guy? Like it would have been interesting. I would have loved to probably have worked for him for a time. Probably not for my whole career, but yeah, like, dude, being around a visionary like that, like that's crazy stuff, man. I'd love to figure that out or hear or see that or whatever. So. Anyways, if she had acted in that way, I think that she would have gotten more respect from probably the people who have the mental capacities to do some of the brainiac things.
Or to at least understand how those people operate.
Yeah.
And just to be able to see the pros and cons of them.
Yeah. Circle that back to our discussion on this book.
Sure.
You got a doctor who thinks he's probably genuinely helping people. How dare you overprescribe these pills to these people who definitely don't need them?
Yeah.
And him going, you don't know that they need them. There is no objective way to measure pain. They genuinely come to me, and I genuinely think they're in pain. So I'm gonna prescribe them. And then they tell me that we only have one car. It's really hard for me to find childcare. I would appreciate if you'd give me a month's supply instead of a week's supply. I'm just trying to help them out, right? I mean, when you've got people lined up around the building and you're making $200 a pop and everybody's paying cash and you're seeing them for 2 minutes, at that point, it's gotten out of hand. You're just a jerk. But it probably didn't start out that way. Yeah. And that's the point of what it's trying to say.
Well, my friends who sell drugs that are harmful to people, you know, just like selling drugs that's like, all right, so you're making people's lives worse, you know, by doing this. Their justification is always, if they didn't get it from me, they'd get it from someone else anyway. Someone's going to make this money. Might as well be me. I feel like those doctors probably get to that place eventually.
Yep.
It's like, well, this is the reality of the medical system. What do you think? I'm supposed to throw myself and my family and our well-being under the bus because the medical system is corrupt? Yeah. No, I'm on this boat.
Yeah. Yeah. And that can be a part of the thing too. But let's come back to this book or this concept, because it's one of those books where like one chapter's on one timeline and another chapter's on a different timeline. So it doesn't read like A1, A2, A3, A4. It's like A1, B1, A2, B2. That's the format of this.
Interesting.
Of this book.
Yeah.
And it does read like a not a memoir, but like a definitely a nonfiction story. It's factual. And so I mentioned to you, you mentioned you're doing this. I'm not doing this with notes. I don't have any notes on me. I don't take notes of books like that. When I would read something like a Deep and Wide, that you already went through, a Prodigal God, I would take notes on that just for me. But a lot of times I'm using that to also, I'm a pastor, so in my line of work, I need to have content to be able to, I have to have something to say like every 7 days, right?
Yeah.
So having those things written down, you've seen some of my other books that we've talked through before of, I'm just writing everything I can down so that someday I might have to come back and use this and go with it. This one, and when I read novels and when I read this kind of nonfiction that is completely unrelated to my job title, I usually just kind of just read through it and breeze, not breeze through it, but not take notes the way that I would. As a result, I can read through these a lot faster than I would another book because I'm not having to stop, write things down, compile the notes, and do that. And I need to be.
I noticed in your office, you've got your bookshelves labeled books that make me a better person, books that make me a better Christian, books that make me a better pastor. Yeah. So Dreamland would be in the better person category. And this just makes me a more well-rounded, knowledgeable human being. Yeah. Even though it's not directly, like, as far as content goes, related to Christianity or pastoring.
Ironically, I related some of it into a message. Yeah. But that wasn't the goal of why I read the book. I read the book because it was genuinely a field of interest that I felt like I had no knowledge of. That I'm speaking on Sundays to a bunch of people who come at it from who might be dealing with an opiate addiction and dealing with this. I can't believe that I found myself addicted to something. I'm a quote unquote upstanding individual. I'm married.
Right.
I've got kids and a really good job. And if my boss or my wife ever found out about what I'm doing, like that, there would be some pretty bad hell to pay, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So instead of like just writing some of them off as like, oh man, how in the world could you ever get to that spot? Why not understand a little bit more about how people get to that spot where it is addiction, or understand that, like, let's humanize the problem a little bit. And that's exactly what this book does for me, is humanizes the problem in a real distinct way, specifically too in the area of it really highlights, I mentioned A1, B1, two different timeline stories. One is the opiate addictions kind of rising from the East Coast. That's kind of a little bit more where that kind of started. And then Mexican black tar heroin coming up, and just drugs in general from Mexico being shuttled up north, and how these two kind of things then meet in the middle for this. And so
is the West Coast more into heroin than the East Coast, and the East Coast more into opiates than the West Coast?
According to this book, that would be the format of how it takes place. And that might be simplifying it too much. But he says...
Yeah, well, obviously they're not 50-50 segregated.
This
drug here, this drug there, but they're more into that and they're more into that.
I think that's what you'd see, is East Coast would be like, hey, this is a lot more prevalent over here, not a lot of black tar heroin over there. And then vice versa, not a lot of opiate addictions over here, and then it kind of made its way that way.
Yeah.
But on the A1 side of the story, he says that a lot of DEA officials begin arresting some Mexican drug dealers, and figuring out through conversations with them that they were all coming from the same village or town down in Mexico. Like one town was specifically like known for just sending a bunch of family members and extended family members up, and eventually into people from Mexico would drive to this town, get trained, and then go up from there. But it's in a town called Jalisco, Mexico, which kind of sounds familiar because there's also a state called Jalisco as well, and this is from the state Nayarit, and the town is Jalisco. So that's confusing, but it's the same way of saying, like, I don't know, there's like a Portland, Maine, a Portland,
right,
Oregon.
Yeah.
So like you have to kind of balance those two
Kansas
things
City, not in
Kansas City, but it's both. Yeah, it's been both things. So just to be clear on where this is at, but
cool.
And I know that doesn't clear it up, but they kept finding out, like, this town is supplying these guys, and they have got these men would come up. They would get smuggled across the border, and they would have these little balloons that they would put black tar heroin, and they would stick them in their mouths. And then if they ever got caught, they could swallow it, defecate it out later, and then resell it again at some point. Just smells a little worse this next time around. I don't know. I'm just kidding. That's Brent's reading into it. I have no idea. But they came up, and they would have somebody be kind of a caller, a hub, and it would be, instead of doing it in like back alleys, these people would know nobody. They were just developing a business, basically, of here's a business card, call this number and we'll meet you wherever you're at. So like literally a delivery service. So one of the problems one of the barriers for getting deep into drug addictions was you really had to kind of go and find it, and to go and find it, you had to go into kind of like the dirty places of town to kind of find that kind of thing. And if you're a middle class white lawyer, like the odds of you loitering around the slums or whatever,
if you have any
place.
career, you don't want to be seen certain places.
You're not going to
anyway,
be seen in those places.
Yeah.
So there's like a barrier to get into this. But what if I could tell you that you could call a phone number and they'll meet you just outside of Panera Bread, and you can get it? All of a sudden it's not awkward for you to be seen outside of Panera Bread. Now, what these Mexican drug circles would have to figure out is, where are Mexican communities where we can also blend in? so that we are not the ones going, what are you doing here in Salt Lake City, Utah? That's kind of a odd spot to be, right?
Wow,
So
Tri-Cities would be ideal for that business model.
Yakima literally made it in the book, man. I mean,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I was thinking Tri-Cities even more so because we have a high Mexican population and we have a high white upper middle class population. You know,
Yeah.
probably all sorts of Hanford workers.
And here's
popping
the crazy
opiates
thing
out
about
here.
this. These guys were incredibly smart. They knew what would get them arrested and put in jail, and they knew what would simply get them deported. They kept their limits really small. They had fantastic avenues to be able to get stuff in, so they never had too much on them to where if they got caught, they'd be thrown in prison for 10 to 15 years. They always had just enough on them where, at least for a while, this has changed since the book was written and even as the book was being written to adjust to this. But they saw a market. They saw that people weren't going to go to the slums. We'll go to them. And we know the American law is if I only have a certain amount of ounces on me, then all they'll do is send me back to Mexico. And then I go down.
BRB. Damn.
Yeah. And so
That's really a downside to how structured and ethical our legal system is compared to some others, is that, like in Mexico, if you get caught by the police, it's like you might go to jail, they might kill you, you might have to pay them, they might bust your kneecaps, they might threaten your family, you might go to prison. You know, those are just people. It's like, the
here's the
law
thing about these
people are going
guys,
to catch
though.
us. This system is like,
they're down there working in sugarcane fields and agave fields, making almost nothing. They can work their entire lives and make nothing, right? Where they can come up, they can kind of risk their lives doing 2 months or 2 years of this kind of a job, eventually get deported. But when they get deported, they've got so much money, or they if they can do this if they can just manage for a year, if they can avoid getting caught for a year, then they can go home. And they can have, they can build a really nice house. They can do all these things for their family.
right,
And
I would.
and what is commendable about them is, like almost none of them got addicted to their own stuff. They make it down there and they ship it up here. And like one of the rules was you don't do any of the drugs. You account for all of your receipts. You don't date anybody around here. You don't have a life, basically. You do this as a job. You punch the clock. You go sell from 9 a.m. till 6 p.m. You go home. You bundle the stuff up for the next day. You do this for a couple of months. Then you can go home. And then you can live. Then you can go into Mexico and spend all your money and get, obviously, way more for your dollar or your peso down there.
Right.
So what you have is not a lot of people consuming their own product and kind of like getting addicted as well.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
and they had their own kind of internal rules, and because it's such a family tight community too, they never outed each other, because they know, like, I can't out family, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to tell you where I got this stuff, and that just doesn't work when I'm working for you, but only as much as you pay me, you know what I mean? And I know that you're just going to let me go down there, and as soon as I get down there, I've got other people taking care of me, and then I'll get back up there. And so it was crazy. So it was interesting to kind of see in the towns that they picked. Denver, Colorado was a big one. Boise, Idaho was a big one. A lot of towns in California. Like I mentioned, Yakima was big. Portland was big. And just the kind of people that Sam would interview who kind of had a career in that, some of them for a really long time, and the way that they moved up the system from once being a delivery guy to then being the phone caller to then being sort of a kind of a more of a drug lord back home, kind of overseeing the whole system. And really the concept of it, he brings up this black tar heroin thing because as opiate addiction began to move from East Coast towards Midwest, you've got black tar heroin addiction moving from West Coast towards Midwest, excuse me. And when they overlap, that's really where the biggest damage is done, because what you see is these people have been set up for an addiction, needing these pills, and the pills get expensive, and now they're not issuing as much as I need. And how do I get a bigger high for cheaper? And it's through this black tar heroin stuff that's coming from the East Coast. Because even as they kind of ran their thing over here, their markets were limited because it still was such a potent sort of drug. It's kind of like diving off the deep end, or like your first beer being like a triple IPA. You know, you're like, no, you ease in. Like you take a Zima first or a Smirnoff Ice, right? Like nobody dives in with a like a super hard whatever. Anyways,
I wonder if the people at the tippity top of the opiate hierarchy, opioid hierarchy, and the black tar heroin hierarchy have any business with each other, you know? Because the heroin industry benefited so much from the opioid pharmaceutical industry easing people into that realm of drugs. I wonder if the money's connected in any way.
I doubt it, because who do you think's at the top of the opiate addiction people like thing? It's
Who's making the most money off
Yeah.
of it? I don't know.
I mean, I
You
would
think it'd
guess
be
it's
pharmaceutical people?
absolutely pharmaceutical companies who are
Yeah.
okay. So that's part of this thing too. So
Yeah, what you got?
one of the things that these pharmaceutical companies are now being kind of held to account for is, for a long time they kept quoting a study that was done like in the early 90s about how these OxyContin and morphine drugs are not addictive. Like it's all it is. Like there's no addictive effects to morphine. It's simply we found the holy grail, which is a maximum amount of comfort and a minimization of addiction. And that's just not true. Like what we know now is, like, for whatever reason, a maximum amount of relief is also associated with a maximum amount of addiction. You have to be really careful. Like morphine's important. You need more. Like our country is better because of morphine. Like our ability to perform surgeries that are life-saving are only able to be pulled off because of morphine that reduces our shock factor for our brain that has to adjust those high levels of pain. And so like we're better off because we have it, but it also brings with it a high level of this, which is why it's such a controlled substance, right? In that talk that I gave a couple of weeks ago on Sunday, I talked about how the morphine, what it does is it addresses these pain receptors. Our bodies have, or this morphine molecule is so unique in addressing all of the different things that our pain receptors are looking for. The endorphins that are produced when we see a small child or a small puppy, like we feel good, like that times 1,000 is what we get with this morphine molecule. But the morphine molecule is unique in history in that it doesn't operate like any other molecule that we take. Most of the drugs that we would take eventually pass through our system, get kind of relegated to our like a glucose level, and then comes out through pee or whatever, right? Which is why you get drug tested through your urine, because that's your body expelling the stuff. But the morphine molecule does not expel in that way. It simply half-lights itself into indetectability. So it never truly fully leaves your body, which also then leaves you needing more morphine the next round and the next round and the next round.
Because there's always there's always half as much as there was in, how long is the half-life?
I don't know. I mean,
but if the half-life's 4 hours or whatever, you always have half as much as you did 4 hours ago, but you always have some.
Yeah.
Wow,
Isn't that
that's
crazy?
trippy. Yeah.
It's super trippy. So, like, I got morphine when I went in for my gallbladder surgery, and I'll be honest, like, it felt freaking amazing. I was in immense pain, and they stuck an IV in my arm, and I could literally feel it going, like a burning sensation through my whole body within seconds, 30 seconds probably. And I was like, I need to lay down because this is a trip, and I'm not a big drug guy. I've never been a drug guy, so it was like, oh, I get it now. Like I totally understand that feeling, and but then the thought of like that's in me, like still, you know what I mean? Which is fine because.
Have you ever craved it since then?
No, I mean.
Did you ever hear that TED talk that was like, it was called like everything you think you know about addiction is wrong or something like that? A lot of psychologists don't like the talk, but something cool that he pointed out. And they don't like it because of the overly provocative title, not because of the study that he presented. But he talked about how when people were coming back from, I think it was Vietnam, where they were doing a shitload of heroin out there, a lot of them just quit and went back to their lives. And then some of them just stayed addicted to it, and they just continued to run their lives after they got back to the States. And so there was a study done that started breaking down the difference between the people who stayed on it and the people who just walked out of it like nothing and stopped doing it, even though they had regularly out there. And it had to do with how many activities they were involved in as a person, how much meaning and responsibility they had in their life, how many family and close relationships they had. And so that's interesting, right? Because somebody like you, even though you experienced it and you're like, oh, this is bliss. I see how you could just do this, instead of everything else you could do in life.
Mm-hmm.
But you never thought about it again afterwards? You never like, oh man, it'd be fun to do it one more time?
No. And I mean, that's I think it's just like I wouldn't want to go down that road to discover what it would take to get it, I guess. Also, I've got the connect. My life is fulfilled enough without it. Like
You've got puppies and babies anyway.
If I had like extreme,
you don't need those endorphins.
Yeah, if I had extreme chronic pain on some stuff, like I get why. Even after reading this, probably a more generous approach to people who are like, I need weed to kind of like get by. It's not like I'm bored and I need to do this to escape, but like I literally have pain on that, and don't take that to be my public stance or whatever. I don't know. It would be more.
Brent Johnsen endorses marijuana on the Night School podcast.
Cool. Steve Lee can definitely subscribe. And no, I'm just.
He didn't sponsor, and I asked him. So weed sucks.
Never mind.
Nobody in the Tri-Cities should buy any weed unless it's on the black market.
I just mean a greater understanding of some of that stuff. So yeah.
Right. Having experienced a drug taking away pain, if you had consistent pain and you realized, all right, this drug has the least negative side effects and it takes away this pain.
Yeah.
You can empathize with that more.
Yeah. Yeah, and I haven't been in that much pain ever since. Like I got my gallbladder out the next day, or the next, I don't know, it was pretty soon after that, and I've been pretty relatively healthy ever since. So it's like the need definitely hasn't been there. Nor if it would be, I don't know that I'd be like, you know what I need right now? Morphine. You know what I mean? I'm like, I can take some Advil. I got it. I mean, I've had headaches since, but whatever. I can take things that are non-addictive in that way. So
right.
And it's interesting, like acetaminophen and aspirin and stuff like that. They actually put that in
hydros just so you can't pop a shitload of them.
Exactly.
Yeah, I had hydros for wisdom tooth surgery, and 1,000 milligrams of ibuprofen for the 5 milligrams of hydro just tore up my stomach.
Yep,
it felt awful taking them.
It does. It tears up your stomach and it screws up your liver. And then at least you won't die from overdosing on the morphine that, your body's like, no, you can't do this anymore.
Right.
So the thing about the morphine and as its relation to acetaminophen is no matter how many acetaminophen you take, there's only a limit in terms of the amount of pain that it can be achieved or relief of pain that can be achieved through acetaminophen. So like, and I don't know what the numbers are, but like, if your pain is like this big, and I know it's a podcast, so you can't see what I'm talking about.
If you got a broken bone, whatever it is, probably just going to do nothing.
Right, it's going to get you to a spot, but it's still going to be. But the thing about morphine is that the more you take, the more pain relief you really do have. Like you just keep going. Like it's still there, still hurts, more, still hurts, more. Wow. Which is why on the battlefield, when these guys are dying out, half their body's blown off, and they're in an immense amount of pain. This was the humane way to let them die. Was to give them a bunch of morphine that tricks their brain into thinking that pain isn't there as they're bleeding out and eventually dying. So
wow,
yeah.
How did we come across morphine? Does it occur naturally, or did we synthesize it out of other shit?
Yeah, no, it comes through the red poppy opium poppies, and kind of there's a tar substance that comes out of the bulb thing. It's kind of boiled down and obviously, like compress, or what do they call it? Like when you concentrate it in high concentration. Obviously, that's what the point of it is a lot of that. So
imagine being the guy to find that, dude.
I would imagine that there's probably a synthetic as well. I mean, there's a lot of synthetic drugs out there, but I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But.
So what other ideas from the book you feel have made you a better person or more well-rounded person?
Yeah. I think one of the things that it came through was when you better understand how people can get into addictions, you can better understand how to care for them when they're in there or help them see beyond that. I read a book and watched the movie a few years ago called Beautiful Boy. Steve Carell did a movie, and talks about his kid, and he's Steve in the movie is supposed to be a dad. He's a prolific author, and the mom's got a great job, and it's a great family. It's the home that you just think couldn't be that kid. You know what I mean? Somebody else's kid, not that kid. And yet he finds himself in addiction, and the betrayal, and you look at it and you think again, how could you ever do this? How could you lie to your parents like that? How could you steal from your little sister her piggy bank to go get drugs? Like that's just crazy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we associate that, I think, a lot of times with like personal responsibility. Like you're a jerk. And realizing that, there is a definite level of personal responsibility involved in that, but at some point it does get to a spot where it's asymmetrical relationship. So like part of it is just like that's just the addiction doing these things, and there's other things at play in that it's not just he didn't wake up that morning going, you know what I want to do today is rob from my little sister.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And so trying to operate with a little bit of grace in that way.
It's hard to know. It's such a case by case thing to figure out when people need to be told that it's time to take responsibility, and when people need to be told that some of the things that have contributed to who they are outside of their control. You come across somebody who really needs to hear one of those messages. It's hard to tell which one it is.
Yeah. And I think too, so I mentioned that there was a thought going on about how opiates weren't addictive. It was pulled from one study, back in I can't even remember the year. I should have had that in front of me, but I don't.
You said 92 earlier.
Yeah, it was something like that. And just goes to show how when Sam interviewed the author of that original scientific journal article, he said, so you said that it's not addictive. And that author goes, that's not what I meant when I said that. Like the context of that is different. And yet a lot of times people will pull one thing from a supposedly scientific journal or whatever and just hold on to that. And they get over and over again. It became kind of like a cultural norm or a very much a thing, even in public policy for the law structure, political structure of our day of, well, at least we know that opiates aren't addictive, right? And you're like, well, what's the basis for that knowledge? Well, this study that was done clearly points at this, but that study wasn't even real. Like, that wasn't the point of the study.
If you would have studied me when I did I've done opiates or opioids once in my life. It was hydrocodone. It was for a wisdom tooth. Same thing with you, morphine I'm assuming for the car accident you had something too.
Yeah.
But if you did a study on us in those situations, it was like, yeah, patients have no problem readjusting
For
to life
sure.
after being prescribed these, and they were good to go.
Dude,
you can make it look just peachy.
I remember being in the hospital on Oxy. They were giving it to me, and I had different pills, different hours. And I remember it gave me the worst possible nightmares ever. Like, I'm not a nightmare guy at all. I had a dream, and I remember I was like in the hospital bed. I had a dream that I was inside of a sleeping bag, like a mummy bag, and I was being drugged behind a jet ski while in the mummy bag, like I'm drowning or like I'm being waterboarded. And I was like, I remember just like almost like feeling like I'm choking, like I'm gonna die. This is how I'm dying. And then I swear to you, and I woke up and I'm like, these Oxy, these tiny little pills are doing this to me, and I gotta get off them. And so I think I got off of them right away, right? And I was like, I'll take anything else but those. So those were never appealing to me because I just think that they messed with my mind too much, and I wasn't in the right spot. But morphine.
I didn't find the sensation of being sluggish and careless very appealing.
Yeah.
It's like, if I wanted to just like, if I had something I really wanted to escape, and what I needed or what I craved was to just feel like I was in a big comforter and I could just sit around and do nothing and everything was okay, then I would find this really appealing. But that doesn't sound appealing to me.
Yeah.
So I think amphetamines would be more dangerous to me. Actually, I got steroids once for asthma. I had steroids for like 4 or 5 days, and I loved them way too much. I almost looked for them on the street afterwards, and I was like, God, I need to stay away from this shit.
So the book basically ends by talking about some of the aggressive maneuvers by the DEA about figuring out the system that the Mexican drug cartels were basically doing with this, and adjusting the laws to then punish them with incarceration for up to 10 or 15 years as opposed to just immediate deportation. And that began to slow them down. It began to be like a cost-benefit analysis now. Do I really want to go up if I'm going to have to spend 10 years in jail as opposed to if I go up and get deported, who cares, right? So obviously the threat of punishment, I think, helped in that way.
Is that how the law thinks? Like, is that how our judicial branch or whoever that is thinks about placing laws on drugs? Is how big does the punishment need to be that it's not worth it to sell the drugs?
I don't know. I mean, in this case, that's what he made it sound like. And again, it's one journalist's perspective, but they clearly begin to go towards lawmakers and say, if you keep it like this, we're just going to be, it's kind of like whack-a-mole. We knock one down and the next one pops up, and it's just this incessant game of whack-a-mole. And I mean, that's going to be generally true in just a drug culture in general for the DEA, probably. Like, people are going to figure out what they want to get and go for it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And somebody's going to think it's worth the risk, and they're going to do it, or sell it or whatever. And then obviously figuring out what was going on with pill mills, they just realized we're going to have to do better regulation of pharmacies and specifically these doctors so better communication, because a lot of times a doctor would write a prescription and then these people would take that prescription to identified pharmacists who would not check in with a central location to see if it had already been filled elsewhere.
Oh, okay.
And so they would kind of spread the word on who doesn't update their findings. And if you can hit these 6 pharmacists within a 24-hour period, you should be able to get all 6 prescriptions filled.
Wow.
And so like these people would pay, like it talks about how these people had this system where they would go find homeless people, pay them to come get a doctor's appointment and get your prescription filled, and all I ask in advance is you get to keep half the pills and I get to keep half the pills, and I'll pay to drive you around, and I'll pay for your a $200 appointment. And anyways,
wow,
yeah, it was pretty crazy.
Wow.
So it was a
creative.
big economy thing for a while. So all you got to do if you're a cop or a legislator trying to figure out how to do this is mess with the economy, because if the money's there, people are going to do it. You know what I mean? Like that's just basic free market economics.
Right.
So so you make it more punishable to sell it 10 years in jail instead of immediate deportation and just back up here in 6 months, and then you figure out how to block that system off without recognizing, on the other hand, we do want to make sure that people who are in pain are getting the relief that they need, and that is the difficult part. That is the tension. And he ends the book with basically that tension of there are people in need.
So he just shrugs at the end of the book.
Are probably going to suffer like more because they can't get what they want, because it's a pain, like the hurdles that we have to go through. I hate having a prescription that I got to call and I got to pick it up and do the hoops that it's not ready yet. I got to get this done, and you're going, this just feels dumb or inefficient, and they're just trying to make sense of all of this. So it was a great book. It was an easy read. I think it's 350 pages long, 340, something like that. A fairly fast read. Short chapters. I always like shorter chapters.
Yeah,
I can
same
feel
here.
like I can change the thoughts. If you're okay with him, he does go back and forth a lot between the two stories. So you have to be like, wait, who was Carl? Which one was he? That kind of thing. But for the most part, I think once you get that down, it's a fairly easy read, and he's a good writer. So
cool.
Highly recommend.
Dope, man.
Yeah.
Cool. 1 hour, that's like perfect timing episode. That's what we shoot for.
Good.
So let's
I think an
hour
hour is a good length for for a podcast. Anything longer than that, I'm usually like, maybe I'll save that for a long drive. But an hour I can kind of punch through. So, hey, man, I appreciate you having me on.
Dude, thank you.
Thanks for involving me in your night school thing. And if I come across another book that I feel like is worth talking about, I'll bug you about having me back on.
Thanks for letting us use this studio.
Of course.
Dude, this is a dream come true.
Good.
We love it.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Dope, man. Peace.
And I'll have to meet Raleigh next time, too. I mean, I met him on Sunday.
Yeah, Raleigh was supposed to be listening to this, and he flaked out.
I
So
know.
I'm thinking about just kicking him out of the whole thing, dude.
All right. Cheers, brother.
Peace.